especially when you're a kid and you experience that kind of manipulation and that deception, and you always feel like you have to have your guard up and like you have to be one step ahead, and I think also to experience that kind of behavior from your parents, who you have this idea of as being these loving, caring, trusting figures in your life. It's like, well, if they would do these things to me, then why wouldn't a complete stranger? So you feel like you have to, it's almost like irresponsible to have your guard down, you know what I mean? And to be vulnerable right off the bat, because it's like, you could do the same thing or worse to me because I know what this is like. You know what I mean? You're not going to fool me here. But I think that is what can get in the way of a lot of people having these real, genuine emotional connections with other people.
How can experiencing parental narcissistic abuse impact someone's life? This can look very different from survivor to survivor. However, in my experience, there is one thing I have noticed that tends to happen to all survivors of parental narcissistic abuse. It shapes and impacts our lives well into adulthood. Even when we engage in healing, the patterns of behavior, tolerance to abuse, and lack of self-development may continue to mark our experiences for many years to come. Though it is extremely painful to wake up to the reality of being abused by the people we thought loved us the most, healing and growth can be possible, and it can rewrite the chapters of our story that are ahead of us. This week, I am delighted to share part 2 of my conversation with Casey Smith, host of Is Not Normal, a mental health podcast. Casey and I dive deeper into the identity crisis of survivors of parental narcissistic abuse. We will talk about the shame of having behaved like our abusers too, hypervigilance, the power of relational healing, the importance of realizing that not everyone is like our abusers, and so much more. Hi, I am Raysa, a survivor of narcissistic abuse, and I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and you are listening to Hellotraumabrain, a podcast where I share my experiences living with complex PTSD. My hope is this podcast can help destigmatize mental health and provide support for anyone diagnosed with CPTSD who thinks they might have it or has a loved one with this diagnosis. Quick reminder, I am not a licensed psychologist or mental health care professional, and this podcast is not meant to replace nor substitute the care of psychologists, other mental or medical health care professionals. If you think you might have complex PTSD or PTSD, please reach out to your primary care or mental health care provider. Any individuals or resources mentioned in this episode are not sponsoring Hello Trauma Brain. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by this week's guest are solely their own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Hello Trauma Brain and the host. This episode may reference trauma or abuse, and listener discretion is advised. Remember, you can always pause or skip this episode at any time. And now, let's get back to the episode. Hello, dear survivors, and welcome to this episode of Hello Trauma Brain. Thank you for joining me today. Quick check-in. So a lot of things are happening on my end, but instead I want to focus on the fact that this episode is coming out on Thanksgiving Day, which marks the official beginning of the holiday season. For us trauma survivors, this time of the year can be very challenging. My 2nd year anniversary officially going no contact with my main abusers is this weekend, so Thanksgiving has lost a lot of its charm lately. However, I want to continue reclaiming things that have been wrecked by trauma and the narcissistic people in my life, and part of that is still releasing an episode today. I remember the very first Thanksgiving, after realizing that I was being abused by the people I legitimately thought loved me unconditionally. On holidays, it can feel like everyone else is taking a break to enjoy themselves while you are in so much pain, which can feel so lonely. I want to say to anyone feeling this way, you are not alone. I know it doesn't feel like that, and you truly are not. And it doesn't feel like that forever. And I hope this episode can keep you some company. I will be doing my own celebration of Thanksgiving with my inner kiddo this year. Quite frankly, ever since I've become more aware of this stuff, the whole backstory of Thanksgiving, just, I don't know, I'm not a fan of it. So instead, the intention for Thanksgiving, and granted, it's not Thanksgiving yet for me, is going to be to take moments to be thankful for the growth that I've done and try to acknowledge the good things that have been happening in my life. Because if I am honest, like, trauma healing is not all doom and gloom all the time. Like, glimpses do come with good things, and I'm not sure how I'm going to feel on that day, but I will try my best to lower the stakes and the expectations and keep things as simple as possible, and that's going to be good enough. So this week, you will get to hear part 2, which features the rest of my conversation with Casey Smith, host of Is Not Normal, a mental health podcast. If you have not listened to part 1 of this conversation, I do invite you to check that out before listening to this episode. Few things, I forgot to clarify something in last week's episode. I had the wrong last name for the expert on grief that Dr. Ramani had on her network. So the correct name is David Kessler, not Keller. And I did link David's correct information to last week's episode show notes. Also a reminder that the video footage just for the portion of the interview of this episode will be available on Spotify and YouTube. And as always, I do leave the pauses and invite you to reflect with us during those times. I did not do a lot of hardcore editing. I kind of like the idea of really featuring Casey and I as two human beings talking. And yeah, without any further delay, here is part 2 of my conversation with Casey Smith.
And I also just wanted to touch on when you were talking about this identity crisis, that once you start to realize, that position that you were in, and you start to realize your trauma, it is like an identity crisis. Because I remember, growing up and thinking that all of the things that I did and the way that I felt, that was the way that I was born. Like, this is just the kind of person that I am. I didn't really know that people could change. And so understanding that people can change, that I had been mimicking a lot of unhealthy behaviors that didn't feel good, right? And that I don't want to be like this. I don't want this to be me moving forward. It was like, it was freeing, but it was also so overwhelming because I felt like I'm open now to anything, but I feel like I have nothing. You know what I mean? My foundation is gone. Yeah. And it can be really fun and curious to sort of question things and figure out what works for you. Mm-hmm. But I think also losing that stability of feeling like, okay, I have a sense of who I am, is like, it rocks your world a little bit, and I think in that time you really have to be patient with yourself and just kind of figure things out, because I know there was a time when I knew what I didn't want to do, but I didn't have the tools to do the right thing yet. So I was just kind of like lingering in the middle where it's like, I'm not going to allow myself to do this thing that I did in the past, but I can't quite get here yet. So I'm just going to kind of sit in the middle, try to figure this out. And that was a challenging time for sure.
I want to sit with that. And I'm going to say, I think it rocks your world a whole lot, not just a little bit. It really is. You come to terms, when you come to terms with it, you're looking around you, and it's really, for me, it is everything I thought about the world, I thought about myself. I thought about like everything that I've known almost gets thrown in the trash. And now I have to figure it out from scratch.
Yeah.
It's not just one piece of the puzzle, it's the whole fucking thing. And when you're going through that identity crisis, I want to highlight that patience that you were talking about, because you're spot on. It's so easy to get stuck in that cycle of shame. Because I'm going to go ahead and admit it, the same applies to me. I've shown up in my previous relationships in a horrific way. I acted like them. I had the same paranoia. I had the same passive aggressiveness. I was not a direct communicator. I also expected people to read my mind because I get it fucking right. I'm pretty good at I know what people want. I know it. How
and
can
if
they
you
not
love
know?
me, then you should do the same for me, right?
Right. And that was one of the things I had on my notes. I wanted to talk to you about the hypervigilance, because I think that piece, when I hear you talk about that on your podcast, like my brain was just like, wow. Like, we need to talk about this. It's, for me, being able to be in those situations. And this is something that, this has been happening my whole life. I've managed to somehow attract the same type of personality styles one way or another in some way. And like, it's chronic. I don't know that I'm doing it. It just happens. And now I'm becoming aware of it. And I notice that when I am interacting with those people, I am so good at figuring, like, I'm body language, tone of voice. I am looking around the room. What can they possibly need right now? And I'm going to give it to them before they even ask. Like, the goal is to be able to satisfy that need, and they don't even have to ask for it. If that happens, I get a golden star on the corner. And I expect the same for myself. And when I hear you talk about this, like, it blows my mind, because it's been a hard thing for me. I still don't know what I want. I still have friends. Today I had a friend who reached out to me. I've been having a pretty tough week. And she's like, well, how can I support you? I still don't fucking know. I don't know what to tell her, because I expect people to just, I'm not consciously expecting them, but a part of me is like, somebody's going to get it. Somebody's going to show me what I need. And I wanted to ask you and to hear your experience with hypervigilance and how your husband is. I want to focus on that too. Like, your parents have set you up, like, they really set you up to be in a horrific abusive relationship. And it still blows my mind to this day how you found Brandon so young and how you both stayed together. And he's been such a big part of your healing. I wanted to hear more about that hypervigilance and how you have healed that with Brandon and other relationships in your life.
Yeah. So you're so right. I think, being raised in that kind of environment can really set you up for another very similar relationship. And I was so lucky that I found Brandon, because he was the antithesis of everything that I experienced growing up. And I think, had that been different and he was manipulative and he was abusive, I don't even know if I would have known. You know what I mean? I think it would have just been so easy for me to continue to people please and to be hypervigilant and to feel like, oh, the happier I make this person, the better I'm doing. And I'm so thankful that he stuck with me through all of that, because he would always sort of hold me accountable for my unhealthy behavior, but he was patient with me, and when I look back on it, I imagine myself almost as like a toddler where, I was freaking out at certain times, if we would disagree or if something was triggering for me. And it was all based on fear, fear of rejection, fear of abandonment. And to be met with calm and with patience instead of any sort of volatility or, threats to leave or to do this. It's kind of like imagine a toddler calming down, you know what I mean? And like they stop crying and they realize that, what, this is uncomfortable, but I'm still safe. And that was so important for me in my healing journey. But, before realizing my trauma and understanding what hypervigilance is, I would expect my partner to read my mind, or I would drop very subtle hints and say, oh, I really love going to the beach, like we should do that sometime. and then not do anything to actually make a plan to do it or anything, but then just kind of wait and see if it happens. And if it didn't happen, then I was upset. And the longer that it didn't happen, the more upset I would be. And I didn't know that I could just directly say, hey, I mentioned going to the beach and we haven't gone yet, and that upsets me. Instead, I was like, I need to project my sadness or maybe be passive aggressive, because that's how he's going to know that I'm upset. Because that's even hypervigilance, picking up on someone's change of tone or their mood and then feeling like it's your responsibility to regulate them. I thought that was normal.
Yeah.
And to take it one step further, I thought that if I even had to say what I wanted or what I liked, and he just didn't automatically know this, didn't matter if we were 6 months into our relationship, a year, he may not have known me that deeply. He should just know. Looking back, it's like, that is kind of impossible, And I thought that if I had to say that it somehow took the kindness or the thought out of that gesture. And it's like, well, you know what? Now that I had to say this, I don't even want to do it anymore. Oh my gosh. And it's, I'm so thankful to be at a place in my life and in my relationship where we have established really healthy communication. And I know that I can say how I'm feeling and the things that I want, and how wonderful it is for you to be able to say that directly to someone, and then for it to be reflected in their actions, for them to actually make an effort and go ahead and do it. That's so kind. And that's such an amazing thing to experience, because they're showing you that they care. But for a long time, I thought like, it doesn't mean as much now. You know what I mean? Because I had to say it. And that was in Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. Again, I reference that book so often because I felt like my jaw was on the floor every time I would turn the page. And the author says, one of the key phrases of an emotionally immature parent is, if you loved me, you would just know. And when I read that, I was like, this is my life summed up in a sentence, and it is not normal.
Yeah. Let's highlight that. It really is not normal. And I want to take a moment before I forget to give you self-compassion and to also give you some credit. Because Brandon has been such a wonderful influence in your life. Like every time you talk about him, you light up. And but I also want to point out, you had a willingness to grow and learn. This relationship wouldn't be right now if you would have been like doubling down and no, this is how it is and you should fucking know.
Right.
Right? Like you having, and anyone listening, if you carry the shame, I know I still carry to this day. Like if somebody plays me footage of me in previous relationships, I'm gonna be cringing and wanting for the earth to just open up and swallow me whole. If you're carrying that shame, I want to offer you and just really reflect on this concept of you can make a different decision next time. That's, to me, when I hear your story, that's how I see you and Brandon still together, because there's growth. And I'm sure Brandon has done some stuff too that you've had to work through with him. Like that relational healing is so important. And for trauma survivors, like if you're a child trauma survivor or you've been in a relationship as an adult for many years, like that trauma, that relational trauma gets healed in relationships, excuse me. And I feel like for a while I thought I had to be alone and figure it out. And I kind of actually, not kind of, I still do. I still think to myself, let me get a little bit better healed before I get on the dating apps and look for a partner, because I don't want to bring all this crap into my next relationship. And I often have to sit with something that you are an example of. You can start a relationship and not be fully healed and heal in that relationship.
Yeah. And I think it's so important to remember, if you are in a relationship or if you're entering into a relationship, that a lot of the challenges that you might face with each other, chances are that's rooted somewhere in your past. And being able to unpack that, you can do that together. But I think sometimes, people sort of start off thinking, well, this is a problem with our relationship. This is a problem between you and we need to fix this. But if you never trace that back and sort of unpack that within yourself, then those relationship problems aren't going to go anywhere. And I think, it's also really important to mention that you have to be with a partner who is open and willing to grow. Like you said, there has to be space for growth. And then you can sort of forgive each other, and you can establish healthy communication. And, we've both gone through our fair share of things throughout life that sometimes still make their way to the surface, and you can find yourself at a point where you can say, hey, I'm feeling like this. You know why, you know what I mean? Here are the different things that maybe you can do to help me through this. And then you can move through it together. But it's a really challenging thing to, I think, enter into a relationship without first at least having an awareness of your own past and your own trauma. I think if you have that and you have a partner that's open and willing to learn and grow with you, then you can absolutely make it work.
I love that. I love that glimpse of hope. I feel like we don't hear a lot of glimpses of hope sometimes. Like the content is all these horrible things happen to me, and I know I've shared some of that in my podcast, but I like highlighting I'm gonna call them the victories of healing. And it's victories plural.
Yeah.
I want to highlight the plural because there is no point, at least I used to, like when I started, I was hoping it would be like a finish line. But the more I've done this work, the more I realize it's kind of like a video game. You just level up. Yeah. But then there's a next level that you have to do after that. And it's a perpetual leveling up till probably for the rest of my life. But I want to celebrate that victory and also bring to focus the fact that neither of us here can come on and say we're completely healed and this is what healing looks like and it's over. Like I'm still catching up on your podcast. I'm like halfway through and still listening to some of the newer stuff. So I'm like out of order at this point. Yeah. And I forget when you said this, but you were talking about how you still hear the voice of your parents in your head. And that really struck me. Yeah. And I was curious to hear, like, when that's happening, if you could share for anyone listening, like, how do you cope with that?
It's a challenge for sure. I think, whether I'm making a decision for myself or, there's an interaction between my husband and I can hear, and it's not like I try to think of it. You know what I mean? It's just kind of there. It's like instinctual, where it's like, I know that this is what they would say and this is how they would handle it. Yeah. And so I hear kind of what they would have to say about my decision or how they would respond, to this interaction, especially if it's something a little bit more stressful. It's like, I know the sarcastic thing to say. I know the passive aggressive, hurtful thing to say here because it's right there, and it's kind of not that I have to fight against saying it because I know that it's wrong, but it definitely does sometimes make me question myself more so in the decisions that I make with myself because, growing up, I wanted nothing more than to make my parents happy and for them to be proud of me. And I put so much value on their approval. And I felt like, I think this is a shared experience among a lot of children, even if their parents, if they had a healthy relationship with their parents, feeling like no matter what anyone else said, if your parents said it was okay, then it was okay. Like if you got in trouble in school for maybe talking back to a kid who was picking on you and the teacher disciplined you, but when you got home, your parents were like, listen, you did the right thing by standing up for yourself. It's like, I can sleep at night and not think about this. And I think one of my biggest challenges has been moving through my young adult life and, making really big decisions about, what I want to do as a career or, what car should I get? Should I buy a used one or should I lease? Like all of these different adult decisions that I would love their guidance and approval on. Having to do those alone and figure them out and then also feel like they may not approve of this. You know what I mean? Because I'm doing it differently than them. It's definitely been challenging, because I think so many of us crave that comfort from a parent and that reassurance that, as we're figuring life out, like we're doing the right thing, we're doing okay. And so I think sometimes I just have to give that to myself a little bit more. You know what I mean? I have to reassure myself that like, it doesn't matter what other people say or what other people think. This is my life. And if this is what feels right, then that's what I'm going to go with. So it definitely has been challenging to kind of get their voice out of my head. I don't know if I will. But like you said, it's a process. You know, I don't think anyone who has gone through anything like this will reach a point where they're fully healed. And, you know, they never think about it again, and they never mess up again. Yeah. It's a process. And there are times too when you're doing really, really well, and then you're triggered by something. And, you know, I've called it in the past a relapse of bad behavior, and you find yourself acting in a way that you're not proud of. And maybe you come out of it sooner and you can understand and reflect, yes, I did the wrong thing. But, you know, sometimes those emotions, those defense mechanisms and those different methods of self-protection are so powerful that they're really hard to fight against, you know? So that's why I stress all the time, you know, in my podcast, to be patient with yourself, because it's hard and it's consistent. You know, even when you face a challenge and you do the right thing, I feel like you're aware that you did the right thing and that you didn't do the wrong thing that maybe felt a little bit more natural to you. It's always there, you know? And so it's a lot. It's a lot to handle.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Casey. And I agree with you that, like, when I hear that experience, like, it is a lot. And I think I also want to throw into the pile paying attention and being, again, like, curiosity. Sometimes for me, and I'm starting to get a little bit better at this, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but sometimes I'll have the thought and I'll hear the voice, and it sounds like my voice. And then I stop for a second and I just ask to my, like, I ask internally, whose voice is this really? Is this something so-and-so would say, or is this something I would say?
Right.
And, like, sitting, like, I do inner child work. So, like, sitting with my inner kid and be like, this is not our voice. We're not listening to that anymore. This is our value now. And this is what we're going to go with. But I still feel the shame. I still feel that moment where I'm like, why is that still there? And I love that you're offering that concept of being patient, and I'm going to throw into it, like, that curiosity. Like, if you can be patient and curious, it's a hard process. It's going to take a long time, but I feel like little by little we start untangling there. I mean, it's almost like goo on us. We have to, like, unstick the goo and clean it off constantly.
It's like glitter, you know, you ever, like, spill glitter and, like, you think you have it all, but then, like, it doesn't ever really go away. Like, a year later you find somewhere and you're like, how is that possibly still there? Like, I vacuumed, I mopped, and it's still there.
Oh my gosh, that's great.
I don't know if I've ever compared childhood trauma to glitter before, but I think it makes sense.
It totally does. I don't think I've heard that either. I'm gonna call it toxic glitter, because it stinks, it looks awful, and it feels awful. It's burning. And you can't get it all off with one wipe. Right.
Exactly. It's an ongoing process. But I think something that is really helpful as we heal and as we move forward is this idea of a future version of ourselves, and understanding, once we realize that we can change and that we have changed, to kind of, like you said, with that curiosity, to ask yourself, what would sort of this ideal version of me, the person that I want to become, how would they handle this? You know, how would they feel about this and move forward? And I think having an idea of that can really almost give you something to aspire to, you know, because as you start to heal and you move through these things a bit more easily than you did in the past, I think you can sort of feel more capable than you did and reclaim that sense of power, where it's like, you know what, granted, I have so many moments where I'm overwhelmed and I don't feel that powerful feeling. But when you do, it's so nice to lean into it, you know, like, I can do this. And those moments, I think, can be really, really great to highlight, you know, as you move throughout healing, because even to have gotten to the point where we're at now, and for anyone listening, you know, to have made the decision to start to change, and to have endured everything that you've endured, you are so strong for that, and so powerful and brave to have gotten here, that you can do anything. You can create any kind of life that you want for yourself.
Take a moment, anyone listening, just sit with that, because that's the bread and butter of doing this work. It's becoming aware that you have options.
Mm-hmm.
You had no
Right.
options. When you grow up in this stuff, there is no options. There's only one option, is whatever makes the abuser happy. That's
Mm-hmm.
it. There's
Yeah.
no thinking about anything else, because anything else will be met with abuse, punishment, shame, just more toxic glitter getting thrown at you. And to get out, that being completely no contact, or you're setting boundaries, or you're starting to realize and starting to do your own research on your own, to give yourself the opportunity of considering the fact that you have other options on the table and other paths that you can take, and then another whole life that you can live. I think that sums up the reason I'm doing this. This is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I don't think I will ever be able to say, I mean, I hope not. I really, let me not say that out loud. I really hope this is the hardest thing I've ever had to done, because it really destroys you in so many ways. And also it puts me back together. It's the weirdest irony of life, that like this has been the hardest thing and the best thing I've done all at the same time.
Yeah. I completely understand and agree with that. You know, like even, you know, how you said earlier, one of the things that you grieve is the death of yourself.
Yeah.
The idea that you can sort of get to be reintroduced to yourself as an adult and live that second life, you can sort of like come back from that.
Yeah.
I feel like it kind of falls in line with what we're talking about now, you know, that there is opportunity for change and for a future that is so much calmer and more aligned with your authentic self.
Yeah.
There is a lot of hope there, you know. I think it's really cool. And knowing all that we know as survivors about toxicity and unhealthy behavior and all of these different things, it's like we get to sort of start a new life with a lot of information where we can make more informed decisions, you know, which can be a positive thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It totally can be. And I'm thinking, that brings to my mind this week, I keep saying it, this week has been really hard. And by the time I release this episode, this week is not even happening anymore. I hope that by the time I hear this again, it's a better week. But this week, thank you.
Yeah.
This week I had a chat with, so I do group therapy too. I've done so many modalities. I want to start a series called From the Patient's Point of View, so I can start talking about what each has felt for me.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I think so. I think we need that, right?
Totally. Yeah, what the different experiences are like for different forms of therapy. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. That's very encouraging. Sometimes I have the idea and I talk myself out of it, but I'm gonna put a pin on that. And I was talking to my group therapist, and I pretty much just bawled the entire 30 minutes that we were on the phone. And I left feeling better because I felt seen. And, you know, he has a way to just give me these nuggets that validate, you know, what's happening right now, that bring to focus why I was set up to be this way, what happened to me. And it really hit me when I was on the phone with him. Like, I got off and like, I just felt different. And I'm still trying to figure out why, but if I had to answer that question right now, I would say it has to do with being fully seen as myself, and someone not trying to minimize it, not trying to spin it so it's now, you know, a good thing, or being like, well, you know, people do that all the time, just get over it. Like that moment of just holding space, just letting me cry it out and saying, I see you, this was wrong, and you have a right to feel this way.
Yeah. Oh, it's powerful. It's really moving, you know, I think, you know, because growing up in that kind of environment, I think we can be conditioned to really crave the validation of other people in our lives. Like they have to allow us to feel the way that we're feeling for it to be real. And I think that there is some truth to that as we get older and as we heal, because we can tell ourselves however much we want to, that it was bad and that we should feel this way. Yeah. But, and even sharing on social media for me, it has been so validating because so many people have shared these kinds of experiences that it's like, I am allowed to feel sadness about this, and I am allowed to grieve these relationships, and I'm allowed to feel these negative emotions, not that really negative or emotions are positive or negative, but these heavier ones.
Yeah.
And I think talking about that emotional loneliness that I think so many of us can experience throughout childhood, to create a connection with someone as an adult where you are free to feel your emotions and you do feel seen is, it's so nice. It is so nice because you can feel throughout childhood like you are screaming at the top of your lungs, just trying to get your parents to understand you and to see you. Yeah. But it's like you're behind a wall and they can't, or they choose not to. And so I think once you finally feel heard and seen by other people, oh my gosh, it's so validating. And it does, I think, take such a weight off of your shoulders, because it's like you don't have to hold this inside. You're not alone in this anymore. And so you can start to let it go. And I'm so glad that you experienced that. I think everyone deserves to experience that lightness, and that feeling after sort of just letting it all out, and understanding that you're in a safe enough space to do that. Yeah. And it feels so good.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And take in that, like, those are the little things. Mm-hmm. Those are the little things that didn't happen.
Right.
And that's why it feels like that now.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate you holding space for that, because I feel like for childhood trauma survivors, there is no template, there is no 101, these steps, if you do them for a year, get 100% guaranteed, it will go away. There's no such thing. But I think sometimes it doesn't have to be this grandiose epiphany moment. Mm-hmm. It's the little things. Mm-hmm. It's the having a spouse that is not going away when I make a little mistake.
Yeah.
Is that friend that is messaging you, how can I support you? Mm-hmm. It can be the therapist that's holding space for you and validating your experience. It could be the TikTok video. It could be the book. It can be so many things, and they add on. Feel like for us, like, it took a lot of little things to get us to where we are now, and it's going to take a lot of little things to get us out of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. How does that land for you?
Oh my gosh. It hit the nail on the head for sure. Even, in the very beginning of my healing journey, I woke up one morning and I felt like I have no idea who I am. I was dealing with so much separation anxiety for years, and I really never got a chance to know myself, and was having a really hard time being by myself for any amount of time. Mm-hmm. And that was sort of what prompted that first TikTok video. I took a drive by myself, and I remember coming home after that. And, going out when I was younger, as I was like in my teens, if I would go to a friend's house or do anything outside of my immediate family, it was always sort of a 50-50 shot of whether or not I was going to come home to things being okay or things being tense. If they were mad that I was out for too long, or if they were mad that I was out in general. And so when I came home and my husband was there and he had a cup of tea for me, I was like, okay, I can do this. We had a pair of matching mugs that we bought, and I was washing his mug one day and it broke. And immediately I wanted to cry. I was so sad. And I was like, oh my God, I broke your mug. I'm so sorry. Mm-hmm. And he was like, it's okay. Mm. And I was like, but like we had matching ones and we got it at this place. And like, are you sure? I'm so sorry. Oh, and yeah. It was okay. And it was actually okay. And it wasn't like he was just saying that it was okay. And then the next time we had a disagreement, he was going to bring it up to say that I was such a bad person. Right. And so it's been practice for me. Those little moments, those adding up, it's like me showing myself that I can do this, and sort of teaching myself that it is okay. and like you said, it is all those little instances that I think so many of us are aware of. And I think it's important to acknowledge how those things unfold, because it's like when you do something and you expect something bad, but something good happens, it's like, okay, this is a step in the right direction. Maybe I don't have to feel like this. And the more that you experience those things and put them into practice, I think the more you start to show yourself that not everyone is like them.
Wow. Oh, not everyone is like them.
Yeah.
I want to call this podcast episode It's Not Normal, but I might call it that. I might still call it It's Not Normal, but man, not everyone is like them.
Yeah. Because it can feel like everyone is, especially when you're a kid and you experience that kind of manipulation and that deception, and you always feel like you have to have your guard up and like you have to be one step ahead, and I think also to experience that kind of behavior from your parents, who you have this idea of as being these loving, caring, trusting figures in your life. It's like, well, if they would do these things to me, then why wouldn't a complete stranger? Right. So you feel like you have to, it's almost like irresponsible to have your guard down, you know what I mean? And to be vulnerable right off the bat, because it's like, you could do the same thing or worse to me because I know what this is like. You know what I mean? You're not going to fool me here. But I think that is what can get in the way of a lot of people having these real, genuine emotional connections with other people. We project these unhealthy behaviors that we've grown accustomed to because we're trying to protect ourselves. And it's important for us to validate that. You know what I mean? For not for us to allow that to dictate how we show up in relationships, because it will get in the way. Yeah. But I think to validate it and to understand that there was a time in your life where you had to do this, where this was beneficial to you. And it's going to take time to unlearn that. And I've compared it in the past to sort of having all of your muscles tensed all the time, when you're in that kind of environment, and you have to teach yourself how to relax them, you know what I mean? Little by little. And there are times when you want to tense back up and, that doesn't feel good, and then sort of relax them. It's a cycle for sure.
Yeah. I'm sitting with that, and there was something that came to me as you were talking, and I'm gonna add an extra level of how this can look like for some people, and it was like that for me. Sometimes it's not even that everyone is like them. Sometimes the belief that gets ingrained is everyone else is worse than them. Because personally for me, the conditioning was nobody, Raysa, will love you like us. We are as good as it gets. Everyone else out there is so much worse. You're so lucky to be here. And when you are marinated in that belief, there's no trusting anyone else. And to learn that not only they're not like them, but they can be better than them. It's like mind-blowing.
Yeah. You're taught to fear the outside world, when in reality, what you're dealing with in your personal world is probably the most challenging thing that you're ever going to deal with, But I think it's a way to get you to not want to experience the outside world, you know what I mean? And to keep your guard up, because what happens when you start to experience the outside world is maybe you start to become exposed to healthier parent-child relationships. Maybe you start to see other relationship dynamics that seem and feel a lot better than what you're used to. I think a lot of that closed family system is to keep you stuck, because perspective is everything when it comes to this. It's so important. And what a better way to get a child to not sort of receive or develop any sort of perspective than to make them fear everything and anything outside of what they already know.
Exactly. I could talk to you for so long, but there are a few questions I definitely want to make sure I ask you before we wrap up our conversation. Sure. One of them is there anything that I did not ask you that you wish I had?
Honestly, I'm even surprised. This conversation has gone so quickly because I feel like it's just been so organic and free flowing. I feel like we're just a couple of gals chatting, you know what I mean? And that for me is always kind of the best. I feel like conversation is like a dance in that way, where you just kind of flow off of each other. And so no, I think everything that we touched on was really great. And I hope that it does help whoever is listening to this, whatever stage of their healing journey that they're in. So yeah, no, I I feel totally fulfilled and with this conversation.
That's good. I do have a few more questions for you before we wrap it up. One of them is you did reference a few really good resources that I will make sure to link on the show notes. But is there any particular tools that you would recommend for someone who's getting started on their healing journey?
Well, the first book that I read, that it was a really straightforward read, and I got through it relatively quickly, is The Science of Stuck by Britt Frank. And specifically within that book, there's a chapter called The Emotionally Unskilled Family. And it sort of breaks down these 10 different characteristics of an emotionally unskilled family. And that was one of the first things that I read. And it was 9 out of 10 for me. And I was like, okay, maybe we're onto something here. And that prompted a lot of my research after that. So that is a definite resource. And then also Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay Gibson. That one took me longer to get through. I would sometimes sit down and read a full chapter and then not touch it for another couple of weeks because it's so much to absorb. But it is an incredible resource that I still go back to often. And I would also just say, you know, to journal, to reflect on the things that you've learned. I journal every day. And, you know, for me, there's always so much going on in my mind that getting it out on paper really helps me to reflect on how I was feeling throughout the day and, you know, get in touch with my emotions. I think it can be easy for our minds to be kind of going a mile a minute, especially when we were raised to be hypervigilant and people pleasers. You're always kind of wondering what's going on around me. How are these people feeling? What can I do? And for me, only being able to think as fast as my hand can write is a really great way to slow that process down. And so I would definitely say, yeah, try to journal, even to just kind of keep track and check in with yourself, you know?
Wow. I'm just blown away with something you said there. Because there is something I've heard for some people, journaling can be difficult because their brains are going faster than how they can write. And I love that concept of, instead of seeing it as, oh, it doesn't work because my brain's going too fast, seeing it as exercising, slowing your brain down and bringing it back to a slower rhythm. Oh, that's good. That's really good.
It's crucial for me. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I love that. I'm a big Heartstopper fan, and season 3 they have like a whole episode on like basically it's pretty much the characters journaling, but they're talking, like they're saying it out loud, like they're like kind of like reading their journal out loud. That's how they, so it could be visual. And that's another episode I'm gonna throw. I know any listeners, you know, I've been talking about this show for a while now, so I will link it. And it's a really good episode that highlights how important journaling can be. I do want to hold space for anyone who, if it's not right for you, completely okay. And we don't, please don't feel any shame. But I do agree with Casey that it's such an important tool and it can be very beneficial. I use it too. So I can definitely vouch for the benefits I've had from it.
Yeah. And find what that is for you, you know, because like you said, it may not be for everyone. And I'm sure it isn't for everyone. Maybe it's going for a walk outside, you know, just whatever it is in your life that you can find that helps you to slow down. You know, it could be making music, it could be drawing, it could be literally anything, petting your dog, you know. But that I think comes with that self-awareness and that self-reflection. Where in your life, at what times when you're doing what, do you feel like you're able to kind of slow down and take a breath, you know, and remember that and then make time for that, even if it's 5 or 10 minutes every day, you know, make time for that, make that a priority.
I love that. Thank you so much, Casey. I got one more question for you. And this is something I asked from all our guests here at Hello Trauma Brain. If you could go back in time to a difficult time, what would you tell younger Casey? Take your time.
That's a good one. I would probably tell my younger self that it's not you and it's not your responsibility to try to change this or fix this.
I love that.
Because I think a lot of us can assume this responsibility of mending our family, you know? And there are times when it works for a day or a couple of days or a week. And so you sort of feel that sense of power. And you're like, well, if I just do this differently, or if I do this a little bit more, then things are going to get better. And I think I was stuck in that loop for so long, thinking that I could do something. And so I think I would definitely tell a younger version of myself to focus on myself and to recognize that it's not my responsibility, that I can't truly change this all by myself.
Thank you so much, Casey. I do want to take a moment to firstly congratulate you on 1 year podcasting.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I can't believe that much time has passed already, honestly.
Goes quick, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I also want to acknowledge the work that you have been doing for other people that are going through this. I think your voice is so important. The voices of the survivors, the people that are going through this journey, normalizing this conversation, bringing to awareness what is normal and what is not. I just want to commend you for your work and acknowledge you for everything that you're doing. I'm so proud of you, and I cannot wait to see where you go next.
Wow. Thank you so much. I had such a wonderful time talking with you. Honestly, I feel like this conversation was so rejuvenating, and I am also so proud of you and how far that you've come, because it takes a conscious decision to do this work, and it's something that you deal with daily. And I think the fact that you are brave enough to share your story with other people and to put resources out there so that other people feel less alone, it's so important. And I feel like things like this, talking about it, being vulnerable, these are the things that are truly going to help people and all people who don't have access to therapy, people who don't have access to these different resources, at the very least, just to know that they're not alone, And so I want to thank you for inviting me to be a guest on your podcast. I had a great time, really.
Thank you so much, Casey. For anyone listening who's new to you and your content, where can people find you?
So I'm on Instagram and TikTok as @BigSisCasey. And then we've got It's Not Normal, the podcast, pretty much anywhere you can stream podcasts on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that jazz. And they come out every Thursday at 10 a.m.
And no worries, people. I'm going to be linking all of Casey's resources, her social media, and her podcast to the show notes, so you can go ahead and find her over there. I strongly recommend her podcast. It's so relatable. If you've enjoyed this conversation, I want to invite you to take a listen to It's Not Normal. And again, Casey, I just want to thank you one more time for being a part of Hello Trauma Brain. It's been a delight to have you and your inner kiddo here today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Casey. All right, dear survivors, I hope you have enjoyed my conversation with Casey. I loved every second of it. It was a bit hard for me to hear my inner kiddo peeking through the interview. I definitely don't know what people need. I did have to believe that and try to anticipate other people's needs growing up so I could stay safe, or at least feel like I had some control over staying safe, even though I truly wasn't. And I definitely heard my inner kiddo in that portion. Truth is, I never knew. I don't know and never will. I have to let other people tell me what they need, just like I have to clearly and directly express my needs to other people. No one can read minds. Also, I did start the Patient's Point of View series, and actually episode 44 is where I started that series, and I've only done an episode for that series so far. And I talked about the relationship recovery process short-term group. And that is a group therapy modality that I did earlier this year. And I do invite you to check that episode out if you haven't yet and are curious to hear more about this therapy modality. Lastly, I invite you to leave a comment to let me know how this episode landed for you. In this week's healing invitation, inspired by this week's guest, Casey Smith, I want to encourage you to try one of the tools that Casey offered during her conversation with me. You can check out the books The Science of Stuck by Britt or Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay C. Gibson, and or try journaling. Also, I want to invite you to listen to Casey's podcast, Is Not Normal. I actually started the audiobook for adult children of emotionally immature parents. So far, it has been blowing my mind. There's a lot of feelings that are getting stirred up by listening to it. I am on the second chapter right now. And I can tell that it's going to be a very impactful book for my healing journey, especially for understanding the abuse I have endured. But yeah, it's so far a great listen, and I'll let you know how the rest of it goes. Please let me know how this week's healing invitation goes if you choose to accept it. Before we wrap up this episode, all music and production is courtesy of yours truly. Also, I want to share a few ways you can support this podcast to reach more survivors that could benefit from finding this content. You can subscribe and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or the platform you are using to listen. Share this episode with anyone you think can find this content helpful. Follow hellotraumabrain on Instagram, subscribe to the hellotraumabrain YouTube channel, and hit the notification bell to be the first to know when I post a new episode. Also, you can make a donation via PayPal. No worries, all links will be provided in the show notes. Thank you for joining me and Casey today. We hope you found this episode helpful. We wish you the best as you continue healing from narcissistic abuse. It is time for our farewell affirmations. I invite you to repeat after me. I welcome the belief that I am enough. I am lovable. And I deserve to heal. I wish you a gentle week and thank you for your presence.